All right, guys, here we go. Chapter 18, Mobile Radio and the Battle for the Dashboard. About 2/3 of radio listening occurs outside of the home. Most of that listening taking place in cars. Now, what's problematic from the industry's point of view is that listenership is moving away from terrestrial radio, with more consumers moving to some sort of content that is accessed digitally. Part of what's going on here is that you do have the connectivity with mobile going on within your vehicle, but many people are also looking at alternatives to cars these days. So not everyone is stuck in their car. So they're listening to things working from home, or if they're out on a jog, if they're using bicycles or other forms of transportation to be able to get from point A to point B, and they're not carrying a radio with them. So they're turning to some of these new media forms of entertainment, in addition to some of the different customizations that new media has to offer. Ratings and profits are obviously tied to the venues in which people listen, and we're not even sure how to measure that listening. That's also becoming problematic, in that you can't necessarily stop somebody wherever they may happen to be, because we're all over the place these days, and it's hard to be able to track how those things are happening, at least in terms of traditional measuring metrics, as we've done it for radio over the past many years. Now, some statistics for you here. Of all passenger cars sold in the country in 2020, around 91% were connected. That's over 13 million connected vehicles sold in the United States alone. And I would add to that there's a lot of devices that are now making it possible for older vehicles to be backwards compatible with various Bluetooth adapters and aux cords and things of that nature. 61% of Americans 18 and older have used online radio or podcasts in their vehicles. 50% of Americans 18 and older use AM/FM radio most often in their cars, while 15% use online radio or podcasts. So there's still a market for traditional AM/FM radio, but we can see that it is on the decline. Fred Jacobs says that the younger the listener is, the more likely the listener is to seek out digital content, especially what we consider non-linear content. And basically what we mean by non-linear would be these various aggregate services that allow you to be able to choose what you listen to either on demand, or allow an algorithm to choose the content for you based on your own particular preferences. 86% of Americans aged 12 to 34 listen to online audio in the past month. That number decreases a little bit to 76% as you get in the 35 to 54 age range, and then about 42% of Americans age 55 and older. So while the numbers decline as people are older, it's still becoming more and more popular with many different segments and demographics of society. Younger listeners are critical to the radio industry for two different reasons. One, advertisers generally view younger listeners as being more easily persuaded by advertising than older listeners. That it's more that sense that when someone hears an ad and they can persuade that younger buyer to purchase that particular product or service, that it's easier to do that with younger people than it is with those that may be quote unquote older and wiser. Advertisers feel that a younger audience is statistically more valuable because they will consume a product for a longer period of time. In other words, they can keep selling to that particular person, and if they can get that person to become loyal to a certain product, they have a customer for a longer period of time. Some strategies for reaching the mobile audience. Paul Jacobs says selling the pre-roll position, the 15 seconds before the podcast starts, is an area of expansion in revenue for radio stations. You've got a captive audience. It's short, to the point, very effective. If you are able to get your message across in a very short amount of time to where it's just a minor distraction at best, and of course, many times pre-roll, you're forced to view that ad before you get to the content that you want, then you may have a more effective reach of people being impacted by a particular message. Time shifting in the car can be made feasible through voice recognition technology. This allows for certain things that were provided as content maybe in an earlier part of the day, or being able to even listen to something and use voice commands to say, go back 10 seconds or skip ahead to the next item or whatever. That is something that's becoming very attractive for people, so that, things that are more in that live element, once it's out there, you hear it and it's gone. That's one of the pros of modern content consumption, is that many times you do have that capability with a little bit of a buffer to be able to go back in time, from maybe a few seconds beforehand to maybe even the entire segment that you're listening to, and be able to recapture what it was that you may have missed. Now, the app. Some apps are installed directly on car-mounted devices, and other apps are integrated with existing car hardware. We still see this to a certain extent. You have integration of various types of programs and apps within different vehicles, but how effective that is basically going to depend on people's loyalty to certain apps, certain vehicles. Many times we just prefer to have our smartphone, and whatever we use on our smartphone, we have it connected to the vehicle. But it's still a market that is pretty helpful. The road is not entirely clear for development of in-car radio apps, as some say in-dash systems are unsafe. That's another issue. The more and more that we're getting used to voice recognition and being able to activate things through simply speaking the word to whatever device that it is that we're using, that is helping to mitigate some of that distractive driving, at least on some level. Some systems in use now simply take over the controls of the smartphone and allow the operator to access the smartphone through dash buttons, voice controls, and that sort of thing. Again, I think that's something that most of us tend to be pretty familiar with. And that's Chapter 18. Short, sweet, to the point. So no excuse. Get those study questions done. Get the notes done. Get them turned in. Bring your thoughts. Let's talk about some of the apps you use, some of the features you use. Do you use things that are integrated in your vehicles, or do you rely completely on the smartphone? And what impact does that have on how we consume content? Let's talk about those things when we get together.